Tonight, clearing the air. After 5 days, some European airports are finally set to reopen. But the economic fallout from the still active volcano is spreading all over the world. I'm Katie Couric. Also tonight, the battle over financial reform explodes on Capitol Hill as the Goldman Sachs fraud case fires up those who want to clean up Wall Street. What you copy could come back to haunt you. CBS News investigates how criminals can get your personal information from the office copier. And who needs a computer when you've got George?
609-537.
He's hardwired for hardware in tonight's Assignment America.
From CBS News World Headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
And good evening, everyone. All day it seemed like the skies were about to open up again after 5 days of volcanic clouds. But late today, another eruption in Iceland began sending up a new plume of ash. It's unclear if this will affect plans to reopen several airports across Great Britain tomorrow. Either way, the Royal Navy is sending 3 warships across the English Channel to pick up some of the 150,000 Britons stranded in other European countries. A look at that initial cloud of ash shows wind currents are moving it toward North America, but it's not expected to have a noticeable impact here. Mark Phillips has the latest from London's Heathrow Airport.
The volcano, which at its peak was pumping 500 tons of ash into the atmosphere every second, has changed. For a while today, it was putting out a lower column of debris, one where the ash drops closer to home, giving parts of Iceland an apocalyptic look. But for air travel, ash here is good because it isn't here, over Europe and the North Atlantic. New predictions show the ash cloud receding tonight and into tomorrow so that air corridors can be gradually opened. Authorities will designate 3 zones: an open zone where flights will be allowed, a caution zone where some planes can fly at designated altitudes, and an off-limits or no-fly zone. But the plan only works if the volcano cooperates.
There's a likelihood that we have finished with the worst of the explosive eruption with the high column, but we can't guarantee it.
No guarantees, but for tens of thousands of stranded passengers, misery may finally give way to hope.
We've literally spent more time traveling than we were in Venice.
The new rules come after furious complaints from the airlines that the blanket shutdown was an overreaction.
I've called it a European mess. Why? Because we did not focus on figures and facts.
The argument now is about how much volcanic ash the modern jet engine can tolerate, how much fine dust and minute pieces of glass can be sucked in the front end and not melt under the extreme heat and pressure inside here to gum things up so that the exhaust gases, the thrust, stops coming out here. We know that large amounts of ash can stop jet engines. The airlines are arguing this is not an all or nothing proposition. The ash cloud will be monitored even more closely as the planes start to fly. This air travel crisis, like the cloud, is just changing shape. And the situation is still very much in flux. The latest air traffic bulletin says that the cloud is shifting again and that the announced lifting of restrictions in some areas will be reevaluated overnight. Katie?
Mark Phillips at Heathrow Airport in London. Thank you, Mark. Now, all this gridlock at airports comes with a very hefty price tag. Industry experts say the airlines could lose well over $2 billion. The aviation shutdown has affected 8 million travelers worldwide, and losses in business and tourism here in New York City alone may exceed $30 million. Richard Roth takes a look at the cloudy forecast for commerce.
African roses are wilting in the warehouse. Without jets to move flowers to market, growers in Kenya say they're losing up to $3 million a day. It's not just people who aren't moving through Europe's airports. Air freight's a $50 billion business brought to a halt.
The untold story of the air disruption is the stuff you don't see. It's the air cargo story, what's not being shipped, the supply lines that are being curtailed.
Courier companies are absolutely positively having problems. Most airmail's grounded. And if inventory runs out, a brake company in Watertown, New York, that depends on parts from Europe, won't be the only American firm putting the brakes on production.
So a lot of the suppliers are going to be trying to get trucks to send parts down south and try to get parts out of Southern Europe.
Mark Dixon's not worried. His company Regis connects people by video. He says business has doubled since last week.
We've got lots of people video conferencing in from the US and from Asia to Europe. They just can't get here.
But stuck in Monaco, even he'd like to get moving for a meeting on Thursday.
You can't do it by teleconferencing?
No, it's a birthday I've got to go to. That's much more difficult.
Maybe impossible. Richard Roth, CBS News, London.
Here at home, new evidence that America's biggest banks are on the road to recovery. Today, Citigroup reported a first quarter profit of $4.4 billion, its biggest in nearly 3 years. Meanwhile, the ripples from the Goldman Sachs fraud case are being felt in Congress, which is about to consider new regulations for Wall Street. Here's congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes.
Democrats seized on the government's new fraud suit against Goldman Sachs as one more reason to pass their financial reform package now.
This comes right down to this basic question. Whose side are you on?
But to move the bill forward, they'll need at least one Republican vote. Today, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner paid a personal visit to two moderate Republicans, Maine's Olympia Snowe and Susan Collins.
It's so much more effective to go to the floor with a bipartisan bill.
But she and the 40 other GOP senators signed a letter to Democrats Friday expressing, quote, opposition to the partisan legislation, arguing the bill, quote, allows for endless taxpayer bailouts of Wall Street. The bill would create a consumer protection agency and regulate the complex derivatives market. But what's generating the most Republican opposition is the creation of a $50 billion fund for unwinding troubled banks, paid for by the banks.
That the very existence of this fund would perpetuate the same kind of risky behavior that led to the last crisis.
That position drew a sharp response from the president.
He made the cynical and deceptive assertion that reform would somehow enable future bailouts, when he knows that it would do exactly the opposite.
So who's right?
The bill would make bailouts significantly less likely, but there's no way to end completely the possibility.
Republicans say they have plenty of other issues with the bill as well, and that could complicate the Democrats' plans to bring this bill to the floor for its first vote later this week. Katie?
Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill. Nancy, thank you. Now, as for Goldman Sachs, its CEO, Lloyd Blankfein, left a voice message to employees last night, assuring them the fraud investigation only concerns the actions of one vice president, Fabrice Touré. He said, quote, the core of the SEC's case is the allegation that one employee misled two professional investors. And, quote, importantly, we had assumed risk in the deal and we lost money, just like the other two long investors, end quote. Michael Lewis is the author of The Big Short, the #1 bestseller on the subprime mortgage meltdown. Michael, do you believe, as Lloyd Blankfein said, that just one individual is responsible for this alleged fraud?
It's wildly improbable. I mean, for a start, Goldman Sachs famously doesn't do anything alone. It's such a collaborative enterprise that, and when this transaction took place, when they were essentially designing subprime bonds to explode, to go bad, was at a moment when Goldman itself was obsessed with what it was doing in the market. And finally, you know, what the SEC has alleged Goldman did is something that an awful lot of people were doing. And this isn't a one-off situation. I think that other big Wall Street firms were doing the same business.
Why is the SEC waking up and smelling the coffee at this point in time? Do you think this is politically motivated?
It's a great question. I think, of course, it's politically motivated. The way I'm thinking about it, I mean, I don't know why they decided to do this now, but it seems more than coincidental that it's happening in the middle of the debate about the financial reform bill, and that it has happened not long after Obama said to Wall Street firms, keep your nose out of the financial reform bill, and they declined to listen to him.
Do you think Wall Street leaders have any understanding about how angry the average person is?
I think they're learning pretty quickly. I've been shocked by how tone deaf they've been. I mean, I thought they could have saved themselves an awful lot of trouble by not paying themselves last year, and I couldn't believe that they didn't do that. In some strange way, Wall Street can't control itself, and so it requires some outside force to step in and control it.
Michael Lewis, author of The Big Short. Michael, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Now to Iraq, where al-Qaeda has suffered its most serious blow in years. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki said today the terror group's 2 top leaders there were killed in a joint U.S. and Iraqi raid near Saddam Hussein's hometown. The 2 men are blamed for orchestrating attacks that killed thousands of Iraqi civilians, as well as U.S. and Iraqi troops. And coming up next, a CBS News investigation. Identity thieves could be stealing your private information from, of all places, the office copier. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the first Xerox machines, and it's hard to imagine an office without a copier. But the latest models are creating a major security threat for anyone who uses them, and very few people are aware of it. CBS News has been looking into this for several months now. Here's our chief investigative correspondent, Armin Katayan.
A warehouse in New Jersey filled with 6,000 used copy machines, ready to be sold. And almost every one of them holds a secret.
That's it?
That's the hard drive.
Nearly every digital copier built since 2002 contains one of these, a hard drive. Like the one on your personal computer, it stores an image of every document scanned, copied, or emailed by the machine. In the process, turning an office staple into a digital time bomb, packed with highly personal or sensitive data.
We might find as many as 20,000 documents on it.
If you're in the identity theft business, this has got to be some kind of pot of gold.
Social security numbers, birth certificates, bank records, income tax forms. That information I would think would be very valuable.
John Junton and Sacramento-based company Digital Copier Security developed software that can scrub all the data on hard drives. He's been trying to warn people about the potential risk, with no luck.
Nobody wants to step up and say, we see the problem, we need to solve it.
So we went with Junton to this warehouse, one of 25 across the country, to see how hard it would be to buy a used copier loaded with documents. Turns out, it's pretty easy.
I get equipment in all day, every single day.
Junton picked 4 machines based on price and the number of pages printed. In less than 2 hours, his selections were packed and loaded onto a truck. The cost? About $300 each.
Come on back.
Until we unpacked and plugged them in, we had no idea where the copiers came from or what we'd find. We didn't even have to wait for the first one to warm up.
We've got some documents here on the glass. This machine came from the city of Buffalo, New York, Police Sex Crimes Division. This machine has 249,000 copies on it. Total copies. Prints has 42,000 prints on it. It's also used as a fax machine.
It took Junton about 30 minutes to pull the hard drives out of the copiers. Then, using a forensic software program available free on the internet, he ran a scan, downloading tens of thousands of documents in less than 12 hours. The results were stunning. From the sex crimes unit, detailed domestic violence complaints, and a list of wanted sex offenders. On a second machine from the Buffalo PD Narcotics Unit, we found a list of targets in a major drug raid. The third machine from a New York construction company spit out design plans for a building near Ground Zero in Manhattan. 95 pages of pay stubs with names, addresses, and social security numbers, and $40,000 in copied checks. But it wasn't until we hit print on the fourth machine from a New York insurance company that we obtained the most disturbing documents. 300 pages of individual medical records, everything from drug prescriptions to blood test results to a cancer diagnosis, a potentially serious breach of federal privacy law.
You're talking about potentially ruining somebody's life where they could suffer serious social repercussions.
Ira Winkler is a former analyst for the National Security Agency and a leading expert on digital security.
You have to take some basic responsibility and know that these copiers are actually computers that need to be cleaned up.
The Buffalo PD and the New York Construction Company declined comment on our story. As for Affinity, they issued this statement that said in part, "We are taking the necessary steps to ensure that none of our customers' personal information remains on other previously leased copiers, and that no personal information will be released inadvertently in the future." Ed McLaughlin is president of Sharp Imaging, the digital copier company.
Has the industry failed, in your mind, to inform the general public of the potential risks involved with a copier?
I think yes. In general, the industry has failed.
In 2008, Sharp commissioned a survey on copier security that found 60% of Americans don't know that copiers store images on a hard drive. Sharp tried to warn consumers about the threat, but
It's falling on deaf ears, or people don't feel it's that important, or we'll take care of it later.
all the major manufacturers told us they offer security or encryption packages on their products. McLaughlin showed us this one from Sharp that automatically erases an image from the hard drive.
How much does that component, that option, cost on a machine like this?
$500.
But evidence keeps piling up in warehouses that many businesses are unwilling to pay for such protection, and that the average American is completely unaware of the dangers posed by digital copiers. The day we visited that New Jersey warehouse, 2 shipping containers packed with used copiers were headed overseas, loaded with secrets, on their way to unknown buyers in Argentina and Singapore. Armin Katayan, CBS News, New York.
"15 years ago today, a bomb tore through the federal building in Oklahoma City. 168 people were killed in the deadliest terror attack by an American on U.S. soil. The site, now a memorial, brought out hundreds this morning who gathered to remember and observe not a moment, but 168 seconds of silence. Meanwhile, gun rights advocates held rallies from coast to coast today, arguing their right to bear arms is under fire. In Virginia, where it's legal to openly carry weapons, protesters brought out their big guns, including assault rifles. Organizers say they chose this date to mark the anniversary of the Revolutionary War battles of Lexington and Concord. Apple has kept plans for its newest iPhone concealed, but the website Gizmodo says it got the first look at the super secret device when this one was found in a bar near company headquarters in California. It's slimmer, has a longer battery life, and a camera for video conferencing. Apple won't say if this one is the real deal or an iPhoney. Up next, a human computer named George. His brain is the hard drive of Kramer's hardware. And finally tonight, Steve Hartman introduces us to a real New York character whose last name happens to be Kramer. But don't think Seinfeld, think Rain Man. Here's tonight's Assignment America.
To be perfectly honest, when I first stopped by Kramer's Hardware in Brooklyn, New York, I thought this story was going to be a disaster. I came here to meet a man named George, who everyone said would give me an interview unlike any I'd ever done before.
So when do the customers start rolling in?
I don't know.
Unfortunately, everyone was right. It just wasn't the kind of once-in-a-lifetime interview I was hoping for.
Did the place used to be busier?
Yes.
When was that?
I don't know.
Yikes. The good news is, turns out I was just asking the wrong questions. His boss, Isaac Abraham, says I should have started out by asking something like,
and these are?
What's the inventory control number on this random set of faucet handles?
99-0163. They're centrals.
Central 99-0163. That's right.
750.
And he can do that with just about every part in the place.
513.
Should read the telephone book last night. Tibbs Sally, 4610192.
It's like the autistic savant character Dustin Hoffman played in the movie Rain Man.
Everybody knows Rain Man.
And he qualifies to be Rain Man number 2.
Born with what doctors at the time called a developmental disability, George started working here in 1951 in what was then his dad's hardware store. When Isaac bought the place some 30 years later, he kept George on, partly as a promise to George's dad. but mostly because Isaac realized right away that this place would fall apart without George. What does he do for the store?
Basically, everything.
Isaac says no need for a computer here. George keeps track of all this inventory in his head.
609, 537, we don't have it. We have to order it.
He knows the phone numbers of all the suppliers and can even tell you how to get there.
Yes. Empire Boulevard, make a left turn on Kingston under the railroad bridge.
Never mind that he doesn't drive and has never even been there himself. Finally, no one can say for sure how he does it or why genius would manifest itself through hardware parts. But one thing is obvious. It gives his life order, and order for all of us is comfort. When he's not working, George lives in a group home where he pursues his other passions, looking at maps and reading the yellow pages.
So great. He's irreplaceable, really.
Yes, he is. For them, he certainly is.
So tell us about next week.
Okay, next week. This isn't your grandpa's rideshare van, going where no disabled person has gone before in a vehicle like you've never seen before. Next Monday night.
Thanks so much, Steve. And that's the CBS Evening News for tonight. I'm Katie Couric in New York. Thank you for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.